Okay, we are live. Thank you for joining us for another Hagley History Hangout. My name is Ben Spone, oral historian at the Center for the History of Business, Technology, and Society at the Hagley Museum and Library in Wilmington, Delaware. During these history hangouts, we like to introduce you to some of the fascinating research being done using historical collections at Hagley. One such scholar who's used these collections, as well as many other in our greater Philadelphia area, is Kevin Ryder, who works in planetary sciences in Houston, Texas, and has recently completed and published a book on Philadelphia's Pencoyd Iron Works, forging along the Schuylkill River. And I know I was especially excited to see this personally because I always relish the opportunity to cover industry along the Schuylkill River. No offense to the Brandywine. So, Kevin, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben.
So, I guess first and foremost, why this particular topic? What drew you to? I mean, not just history in general, but this in particular.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess um, mainly, or what the initial driver was inspired by my parents who study genealogy. They're really serious about genealogical research and have been for decades, and both of them have managed to assemble um, long histories of different generations going way back into the 1600s and even tracing lines back into Europe. But the some of the Ryder family genealogy goes back to the Philadelphia area um, in the 1600 late 1600s. And my father has put together detailed histories of some of those generations. Um, and so it's some of the land around the Pencoyd Iron Works was owned or inhabited by members of the Ryder family and their relatives and so forth. Um, so a lot of the documents I think that my father assembled and information he did before the internet, by visiting libraries and so forth around the area. He was from he grew up in uh, Philadelphia, and um, so he has a closer connection to those areas than I do. Whereas I grew up in Pittsburgh. Um, but as he assembled these histories and shared them with us kids, we we had lots of questions, and there was a particular generation, Walter Ryder, who worked at Pencoyd Iron Works, and we heard lots of stories about him. He lived from the mid 1800s to 1933, and so a lot of our immediate family had stories that they passed along about Walter, and my uncle Walter, named for Walt, the other Walter, the Pencoyd Walter. He recalls stories of riding in a train with his grandfather, the two Walters, along the length of the Pencoyd plant, going from one building to the next. And so this is kind of a neat memory. And um, naturally, we I started, and I guess we, in general, our family started thinking, well, wonder what happened in those what was going on in those buildings? Why would Walter have such a privilege to have a train, first of all, and then uh, you've seen panoramic photos, I think, of the plant, um, the Pencoyd plant. It's long. It was located along maybe half a mile stretch of the Schuylkill River, long, narrow strip of land. And the buildings are lined up along the length of that strip. Anyway, so that sort of got me curious. Wondered, what did Walter do? What did Pencoyd make? What happened in all of those buildings? And so I started poking around and trying to learn a little bit about what they did, um, and really uncovered, to me at least, I mean, who knew nothing or next to nothing, really uncovered a lot of interesting details. A lot of what I found were initially in engineering journal articles describing bridges, most commonly, but also something I didn't expect to find was that Pencoyd had made structural steel for some buildings, for example, in New York City, that at the time were the tallest buildings, and some other structures that at the time had the widest span, freestanding span. And for example, I think there was a train shed in Jersey City that fell into that category. And by today's standards, it's not very impressive. I think it may have been 310 feet. And but that was a big deal back then. And so as I discovered these kinds of facts, I was sort of putting them aside and creating files, and then realized that 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 I don't know, after a few years of finding sources like this, I realized this is a great story, and I wondered uh, why hasn't this story been told previously? So, and I couldn't find general information. I'd find little bits of pieces here and there. So after a few years, I think I realized that there was a chance to assemble a lot of this information into kind of a general history and overview of the plant, and the company and what they did, what kinds of products they made, and where you might find them, or where were they located, and things like that. So it was kind of unfolded over a several year time period. Um, I I might pause here. There's a little background noise. I can stop if that's something that's okay with you, Ben.
Oh, certainly, certainly. I wasn't picking it up, but yeah, by all means.
Okay, just I think it might get louder. So let me hold on a sec. I'll be right back.
Sure. All right, and we're back.
Okay.
Thanks everyone for bearing with us. That's part of the perils and pleasures of doing this program as close to live as we can. So, would it be fair to say that in your motivations for writing this, that it started off as a way to kind of explore your family history, but then became this wider project of, well, my family's involved, but there's more to this story too, or there's more to the story that needs to be told for everybody too, I guess might be a better way to put it.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really both of those. So at first, I was trying to learn more about the family, maybe appreciate more what Walter Ryder did, what his role was at the plant, and how he how that affected his life and his family and our family at that time period. And then I think at some point I realized, wow, there's a lot of information here that would be potentially of interest to a lot of people still living in the area. Maybe a lot of uh, people or families like ours who um, remember a connection to the plant, or know that their family was involved in uh, some capacity at the plant and would like to know more about it. Maybe we're all in the same boat. There might be families who are really interested in what happened there, and what Pencoyd did, what they accomplished, and um, so it might be of greater interest to more people. I think the plant employed several thousand people at its peak. So there are potentially a lot of families who are still in the area there along the Schuylkill who might have connections.
Right. And before we get into some of the structural uses of Pencoyd steel, I am curious to know, and I know some of my colleagues are going to roll their eyes at me having trains on the brain, but what did your family member do that he had his own train?
Oh, yeah. So we did. I just sort of mentioned that, but didn't explain. So Walter was initially um, a mechanic and worked in the machine shop. Um, I think he started there around 1883, and at that sort of entry level position, he was 16 or 17, so just a youngster. And I think over time his role changed. Probably gained certain skills, and in fact, my father has some of his uh, technical books that he inherited through the generations. Small set of books, but the books are titled or have cover the topics of gearing and steam, boiler, um, boilers, a lot a lot of you know kinds of topics that would be really central to running an industrial plant like that. Um, and so his ultimate title, I mean, when at the time of his retirement, was superintendent of motive power. So that it's an interesting title. I think it was kind of a common title back then, but uh, I mean, in a lot of different factories. But I think my father explains it as what I think maybe he heard his brother or his father mention this at some point. But when somebody asks what is motive power, what did Walter do? And the answer was, well, basically anything that moves. He's in charge of everything that moves. And so that in a plant like that, that covers a lot of ground with all the equipment that operated in the different buildings. So I think at the end of his career, he oversaw a lot of different kinds of equipment and had to make sure it kept operating. Um, so that maybe that gives you an indication. I think because the plant was so long, he needed a way to get from building to building quickly at times, and trained and maybe numerous times during the day. So maybe a train made sense.
Right. Do you know if it was a narrow gauge specialty thing or?
I think it was. Yeah. So sorry, the details may start to become a little fuzzy with when you get into questions like that. But I think I recall that it was a narrow gauge engine. Yeah.
That type of thing is always fun to get into.
It is. It is. And actually, what you just jogged my memory. One of the things I was hoping in the research is to uncover a photo or a photo that had Walter in it, or some document that mentioned him, or had his name associated with something specific. And I couldn't find that such a document or image, but I think that was a sort of a secondary driver for the research too, just trying to find something like that, something tangible. Um, but it led to a lot of interesting discoveries. So that I think that was satisfying in the end, just to know more about the plant and their capabilities.
Right. I'm sorry you haven't been able to find anything though. Uh, where would you like to go next? We could, I think we have two sort of branching options here that we could either get into some of the products that Pencoyd made, or we could talk a little bit about some of the end products of their steel, because I remember you had some images that you wanted to share today too.
Yeah. So maybe it makes sense. I can show some images of the. So one thing I mentioned earlier, there's a panoramic photo, or they took panoramic photos of the plant. And one thing I like to do is show, just quickly run through what each building is and what they did in those buildings, and that's a good way of appreciating, I think, what happened at the plant. And then I think if I later talk about various sources or uh, something of particular interest that I uncovered, um, it can be put into perspective easier having that little background on the plant. So I can do that if you would like to now.
Certainly, let's go
Yeah,
for it.
yeah. Okay, let's see here. Um, pull this up here, and oh, there we go. That should be full screen there. So just a quick photo actually that shows. So these group photos were pretty common, I think, at the plant, and there were so many people working there. They would have subsets of employees, and I think this one must have had to do with either the machine shop or motive power. Maybe there was a motive power group. I'm not sure. But this, I've circled Walter's photo there. Um, taken, I think this was taken around 1915, roughly time frame. And so anyway, just thought it would be nice to show a group photo there that has Walter. But let me go ahead here to let's see. Uh, sorry, let's see. Here. Okay. Sorry about the skipping through there. So at the top of this image, you can see the panoramic photo, and these photos were taken every few years. I think the plant was impressive, to me at least, in that how it could stay current with the various technology that became available over many decades. And so the plant was always changing. This particular image, I think, is around the turn of the century, maybe around 1900, uh, and it gives an indication of what happened. So in each of these buildings. So um, if you start in the upper left there, whoops, I inadvertently moved ahead there. So there on the left, circled there with the red line, is the steel mill portion of the plant. And so this was where it all began. They made steel. At the far end, there were 10 open hearth furnaces in the steel mill, and they had a unique tilting furnace as well that was operational in that mill, and that's pictured. Well, the ladle for that is pictured in the lower left there. The and the the largest photo here is a view along the length of the steel mill. Looking down, you can see some of those crucibles turned on their side. I think this must have been clean. They were cleaning out some of these crucibles, and the reason I like this photo is because there are people for scale. And you can see the size of that crucible on the right there. I think it's being cleaned out or somehow serviced there. But you get a sense for the scale of the plant, how long the steel mill itself was, and what the conditions were like inside. But that was the very start of the plant there in the downriver closest to Philadelphia. As you move um, upriver, the next big building was a hammer mill, and this is where they had a steam hammer a 20-ton steam hammer installed there in 1889. You can see a photo on the left with some people, again, for scale. Those are the best photos for me, when you see a person, just to give you a sense of scale of what was happening. And then on the right is an image from inside as well, with an ingot being dropped into a furnace for processing. And this was also, I think, in the hammer mill area, right? They would do that right before working or rolling out the material, which happened next. And so there were a lot of rolling mills at Pencoyd. This is the first. So the idea here is that they would roll out either rods or some other shapes into or some other rough shapes, and roll them into more specific shapes, like you'd see on the right there, whether it's a beam or an angle or even tees. And the rolls could be swapped in and out to that allowed these shapes to be produced. And there's an image at the bottom there showing one of the steel shapes about to be rolled through the rollers there that are kind of in the center of the image. So the rolling mills. So these shapes were these structural shapes were what Pencoyd really became famous for. The shapes could be used in construction of buildings and also construction of bridges, and sort of became a specialty of theirs. And so I'll come back to rolling mills in a minute, because there were a couple different kinds. But one of the things that these shapes would have to be straightened and cut and sheared at various steps in the process. And here are a couple of these heavy pieces of equipment that were utilized to do some of this. That was the next building along the length. And then the next length here is again more rolling mills, and these were specialized for whatever work they had on the docket at that particular point, so they could put in different rolls they needed to make various shapes for whatever project they were working on. And then finally, really the largest building of all of these, I think, maybe with the exception of the steel mill, was this bridge shop that was put together. Within the bridge shop, they had all kinds of specialty equipment for riveting and drilling and cutting of mass production of bridge parts. And so this was an impressive structure alone, just the building alone. You can see its size up there. And then finally, at the far end, it was a hydraulic forge, and it was here that they could take a bar of either wrought iron or steel and compress it in this specialized forge into an I-bar shape, which is kind of schematically illustrated there in the center from top to bottom. They had these hydraulic presses that would move the dies and form the soft iron or steel into this shape, and then be able to put an eye shape into, or punch a hole through that eye shape at the rounded shape at the end. And I've just included a few images of the eye bar on various structures that are still standing today, just to show where it fits into the big picture of a bridge structure. And then finally, this is the last image of this panoramic shot, but the shipping yard was a big deal. When you had all these parts produced, you needed a place to store them temporarily and before they were shipped off. So a large portion of this end of the plant was used for storage, and it was adjacent to the rail line. And there you can see an I-beam on top of a rail car at the upper left as an example. That was 1912, but all of these products are lined up there ready to be shipped out to various projects. And let's see, I think, yeah, that was it. So that gives you a sense for what happened in each of these buildings. And it was an industrial assembly line. And like I mentioned earlier, it changed over the years, from its original start in the 1850s, was much smaller operation, shorter operation, and then by the time of some of these photos around the turn of the century, or 1910, 1920, um, it had they had basically filled the available land, with different parts of the operation. So yeah, that's a brief foundation, I think, for what happened there, what happened at Pencoyd. Um,
Well, excuse me. Well, thank you for providing that.
yeah.
Say those diagrams in particular were really wonderful to have. I wish I had had something so nice prepared for me the first time I was tackling industrial history and
Uh,
learning how a steel mill worked. If I could ask one quick question,
yeah.
though, with Pencoyd's foundation and getting into the sort of the era of steel production at the end of the 19th century and into the 20th, did they face any particular uh, roadblocks on the way to making that transition? Because I know as you get out uh, in Philadelphia, but also into the countryside, you can start to find some of these very, very old iron production sites that uh, are even older than Pencoyd. And by the 1880s, they just have to give up. They can't maintain their competitive edge in a way that, well, Pencoyd obviously was able to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think there are a couple of factors that play into that. So one of them is uh, Pencoyd and various other companies around the Atlantic coast region there in general had developed or perfected uh, the making of wrought iron. And wrought iron was used, well, for example, a lot of the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition buildings were made of wrought iron, and they were large structures. And that was 1870, 75, 76 time frame. That's about the time when demand for steel, for iron and steel was really growing. And one of the limitations, I think, was that wrought iron, although it was strong and the process was well understood, the volume of material that could be produced was still relatively small. And one of the advantages, I think, of steelmaking is that it could be produced in larger quantities, larger volumes, and could allow them to keep up with the demand uh, that was that was needed. I think there were so many buildings and structures made in 1895 to 1905 time frame. I think that's when steelmaking really just took off. Um, but that's part of the. I think that's part of the answer. The other part is that uh, there were a lot of companies that could do this, um, making of wrought iron, and then perhaps also making the transition to steel making. Pencoyd, if you look at the records, they had the greatest production volume capability in that time frame. But there were a couple of other really significant companies as well. Edgemore was another one down, I think, closer to Wilmington, and they, as one example, and they um, were as busy as Pencoyd. uh, but there were a group of companies, about 25, I think, 23, 24, 25, that were all merged into the American Bridge Company. And I think that's part of the story too. American Bridge Company, which was ultimately then also sort of incorporated into US Steel, they combined a lot of these smaller companies, Pencoyd included, into one company, and perhaps to meet this demand more efficiently. You know, they they were building structures all over the country, all over the world, and all the expertise at these little plants was feeding into that that productivity and that capability. So Pencoyd, I think, was they had unique capabilities there, and then they had the ability to make such large volumes of material that they were a central figure in that that American Bridge Company initially.
Right. Can we talk a little bit about some of the structures? Because before I pressed record, we've been talking a little bit about how Pencoyd Steel went to support, in particular, the Frank Furness designed, perhaps I should say more appropriately, Baltimore and Ohio train station in Philadelphia. But
Hmm.
then also just the international dimension of this that as I recall from your book, Pencoyd Steel makes it all the way to Japan.
Yeah, yeah, that was a surprise, really, to learn about that aspect, which maybe is more of a reflection of my ignorance initially, but it was really fun to learn about that. Yeah, they had, and I think maybe that was probably partially. Well, you know, there are a couple of variables there, or a couple of factors. I think that the engineers at Pencoyd had been, at least in that time frame. Maybe I'll go one step further here. Here are some of these individuals who were associated with Pencoyd. They had been educated either in Europe, or there was a significant number of engineering expertise that came from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute up in New York. And there was a connection, sort of an engineering connection, I think, within the East Coast, or the Atlantic, Mid-Atlantic kind of region, between a lot of these people. And for example, the um, engineer shown on the right there, John Waddell, he had some connections at Pencoyd, and had built some bridges with their design expertise, and working closely uh, with them. And he was, I think, he had a connection with some Japanese engineers. And this was made in the 1880s, I think. There was a little bit of a debate, I guess, between British engineers and American engineers about the best designs for railroad bridges. And the Japanese railroad industry had, and I think, initially gotten a lot of input from British engineers. And somehow, through an exchange, maybe with Rensselaer and a few Japanese engineers, they reconsidered some of their designs. And pretty soon, a lot of American engineering designs were being implemented in Japan. So there are a lot of, if you look through the time frame there, in like the early 1890s up and through into the turn of the century, 19 up to maybe 1910 or so, there are a large number of structures that were built in Japan that were influenced by, partially by Pencoyd engineers, but some of the other engineering expertise in the United States through this kind of informal network, I think. So that was interesting to see how some of these structures in Japan, which are still operate, still functional, still in their original locations and working as bridges and so forth. That's really interesting to see. But there are examples around the world. Mexico, there are a number of structures in Mexico, um, and I think connected with the Copper Canyon um, railroad area. And then there were some examples in Africa, in Uganda, and also Sudan that were built in this time frame as well. So yeah, they were able to really establish an international reputation. It also, I think, with the U.S. Steel involvement, it involved some structures, some other structures, buildings, and they had a number of buildings that were built internationally as well, where they provided structural steel for the internal structure of the buildings. So yeah, that was an aspect. Like I said, it was kind of a surprise to realize that they had um, this expanded in this international uh, uh, aspect as well. Yeah.
Were there any other surprising finds? Maybe some material that didn't necessarily make it into the book. Uh, we always like to talk a little bit about what sort of archives you used too. So maybe we could kind of wrap those two discussions into one as well.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Let me see here. I can go back a few slides here. And so yeah, here's so it is. I really found so much information. It was hard to decide. I think that the book editors were really kind to me and entertained. I had a lot of images. I think just too many initially that I wanted to include in the book, and to me they were really interesting to me. But some of them, maybe getting a little too far afield or difficult to include in the book. So some of the images that I enjoyed most were those with people, because you get a sense for what people actually did. You get a sense for the scale and of the operations in the factory. And this is one. This was actually a source that I found in the Hagley collections, and it dates back to around 1902, I think, 1902, 1903. And it shows these two workers standing on an I-beam here that was destined for this bridge across the Mississippi River, the Tebbs Bridge there, shown that, the completed bridge shown in the lower right. But they were working on this, and you can see all the rivets, hundreds of rivets literally in this image visible. And they're operating this portable hydraulic riveter that operated. It was hanging from the roof, from the structural beams up and within the roof there by chains. You can sort of see those in the upper right part of the image, and just going along the length of this beam and putting it together, getting it ready to ship out. And this one I liked, and the other I sort of because the image is maybe a little bit difficult to see what is part of the beam and what's part of the background and what's actually part of the riveter. I found an image of a similar riveter, might be actually the same riveter, in the upper right corner there, from a journal article, engineering journal article from about the same time frame, that shows you what that riveter looked like. But anyway, I really like this photo. Riveting was a big part of the work, not only in the shop, but when the bridge parts were shipped out to a job site, where they're erecting a new bridge. They had riveters working in the field um, with all different kinds of riveting devices that they were using, sometimes hundreds of feet above the river, uh, hanging or positioning themselves where they can get at these pieces and for the assembly. So I like, anyway, I like this one. This was one of the early images that I found and really got me excited about looking for more detail, because this is exactly the kind of information I was looking to find. So I might mention a couple of other sources and of information that really helped put together the big picture. So one such source was the Hexamer general surveys that were done in I guess they, I don't know the full history, but I know that I was able to find Pencoyd Hexamer surveys between the years of 1872 and 1891. And so in that time frame, I think they did 3 or 4 surveys, and one of them is shown here as a backdrop. And I mean, the backdrop is the large scale of the plan that you can see. It shows the buildings, and they're very, very detailed. Each building is labeled. May not be legible here, but I did zoom in on one part to make a point in particular. But before I talk about that though, the bottom part of these surveys is actually a nice sketch, of the site and what the buildings may have looked like. And this, again, these are really cool surveys, really nicely done drawings, and help you understand what happens or what kind of details were known at the time. And you can compare, you could find these for another industrial site or factory, for example, and compare the capabilities at different places. But anyway, what I wanted to focus in on with this particular slide is shown in the red box here. Or the red outline box, you can see the letters here, or the label here, Dynamo Room. And when I first read that, I thought that's weird. What's Dynamo Room? And it just got me kind of engaged with learning more about the capabilities at the plant. So that this was from let's see, I think 1887. Yes. So in that time frame, dynamos were being used. They were a device that allowed the generation of electricity, and that was probably the first installation of electrical capability at the plant. And they had, this was cutting edge technology that they had implemented here, and they set it up in this little stone walled building at the edge of the plant. So the dynamo room was a big deal. And here it appears here this subtly in this image or this sketch. When I first read that, I thought, that's interesting, and then it caused me to delve in more. But the dynamo is just one example, I think, of the kinds of technology that they were aware of and tried to implement in the plant as capabilities changed, and they had to stay current to compete with other companies and be able to continue to produce steel and structural parts for all the projects that they're working on. So anyway, I like these surveys. There were a number of them that were really useful in understanding what happened at Pencoyd. I just wanted to quickly call out a couple of others too. The Pennsylvania State Archives has a collection of commercial museum. I think it's the Philadelphia Commercial Museum collection. And within that, there are a number of images of the Pencoyd plant. This is an image I showed earlier too, that really just gives you a sense of the scale of the steel mill. But also, if you look around on the floor of the plant, um, how dirty it is. You know, the working conditions were incredibly raw, and uh, especially by today's standards, probably even by the standards of the 50s or the 60s, 1950s or 60s. You see that just piles of debris everywhere, and people working in plain clothes and these gigantic industrial devices and so forth. It's just really fascinating to see imagery like this. And there are quite a few people in the plant on this particular day. If you look down the length there, you can probably see about 30 or 40 people. Let's see. This image is from the was from the National Archives, and I liked it because it really shows the conditions at night. So there aren't many photos for obvious reasons, I think, of nighttime operations at the plant. But this one was taken around, I think, 1917, and you could see the reflection of the plant in the Schuylkill River there in the foreground. And I just thought that this must have been a typical view from across the river in Manayunk or Germantown, near the mouth of the Wissahickon Creek. For people to have that huge plant just across the river is really something to think about. And in the same light, this is the last image I wanted to show. This is probably the same or roughly the same vantage point, looking across the river from near the mouth of the Wissahickon Creek. And this image was from the Lower Merion Historical Society. And again, looking at the steel mill portion of the plant and all the boats there along the river or the mouth of the Wissahickon for scale in the foreground. But this is a quote that my father brought to my attention from the Pennsylvania historian Cornelius Weigand from 1942. I won't read the quote, but you can read that, I think, as well as me. But he was commenting on how when the plant shut down, it got very quiet in the area, and although people used to complain about the sound and all the action and maybe the just the presence of the plant itself dominating the area, the locals would complain. But when the plant fell silent, people started missing it, and maybe not everyone missed it, but this quote got me thinking that this must have been a very loud area when the plant was fully functional. You think about all the equipment that we've looked at in these last few minutes in all of these various buildings. This is some loud machinery. So I'm sure that although we're looking at a lot of images, and that's impressive, think about how the mill must have sounded at the peak of its operation. And it's important to keep that in mind, I think. And it's too bad we don't have some recording of what it sounded like. That would be fascinating. I don't know. Maybe there is such a recording. I'm not sure, but I haven't run across it so far. But I wanted to just mention that concept of what it sounded like. It must have been very impressive. So that gives a sense for some of the sources I've uncovered, and some of the highlights, some things maybe that I didn't have a chance to elaborate on in the book as much. Yeah, there are certainly lots of sources and types of information that ran across that were just each of them played a little part in establishing the story and the big picture.
So, what did you come away with in terms of how your understanding, and we talked about this at the start of the interview a little bit too as we were introducing the topics, but what did you come away with in terms of how your understanding and the way that you think about Pencoyd changed, grew, evolved, and what would you hope that readers of your book can come away with too?
Yeah. Um, yeah. Thanks for the question and the opportunity. Yeah. Well, I guess, one of the things that I think about uh, every time I, have a chance to think more about Pencoyd is really the how much talent they had working at the plant at all different levels. It it was really a place of diverse talents. You had people who were um, specialists in making wrought iron or steel, and they were that was just a small part of the plant. They were associated with that. There were chemists. There was a little building, for example, where they did chemical analysis that was located just adjacent to the steel mill, and they had a staff in there that could analyze steel for its chemical composition, and that was something that was critical to their product. They needed to know how much carbon or how much sulfur was in the steel, the products, and whether that was within the range they needed to achieve the strength or the engineering capability of the structural capability of their products. So that's very specialized information. And then they had um, people who could uh, sample the steel, get close to the steel, these crucibles of steel, and get samples to take um, take to the chemistry building and so forth. I mean, that's just the steel mill portion. Then you think about some of the other operations where they had specialized expertise, maybe more mechanical people who could do riveting, people who could do forging of the eye bars, specialists in high pressure technology that allowed the hydraulic um, portions of the plant to operate. And it's just a very extensive list. The energy um, that was required to operate all this equipment, the energy needs kept increasing over time, and so they needed to have people that were specialists in bo boilers and steam power, electrical power, electrical capabilities. All of these capabilities changed over time, over the many decades they were operating there. So anyway, I think uh, it's just impressive, I think, that they had so much expertise. And one thing I haven't even mentioned is they had a building where all the engineers were based, and the engineers were designing structures and taking in a lot of the orders for new work. And that was a multi-floored building. I think there were 4 or 5 floors in that building of people with various jobs supporting the design, probably mostly bridge design at that period. But the bridge products were um, just so numerous. So anyway, that that's I think one of the main aspects of Pencoyd is that all that specialized expertise was located there in the Lower Marion, Roxborough, Wissahickon, Manayunk, Conshohocken region, and that's very impressive to me. That sort of expertise is was probably really rare in the country, and there it was all concentrated in that little area. Um, I think so. One other aspect I think are the working conditions, and so that this is something that is well known, and but I think it it sort of came to life for me looking at a lot of the images. Maybe some, for example, some of the few we looked at in the past few minutes, where the lighting conditions in the plant were not great. The plants were not particularly clean, and so working conditions were were a challenge. And part of the book, I focus on some of the newspaper reports of incidents at the plant, and the injuries were very common. People were being taken to hospitals commonly, I think, because of some incident with machinery or something happened, and that's tough to read. But you think about all the equipment that was operating in the factory, and that's just something that all those workers, they lived with that possibility of injury. And again, it's unheard of today. Think back uh, 100 years ago, and that was the norm. So a lot has changed since then, but I think that's something to keep in mind when you think about this history, how uh, severe those working conditions were, and yet they turned out products that have lasted over 100 years. I mean, the quality of workmanship and product, the products in general that were created here. There's so many examples of bridges and structures that are still um, in use today. We were just in New York City, and saw a few buildings there that I had read about and knew about, and then there we were on the street. All of a sudden, realized, oh my gosh, here we are. That building right there has steel that was made 110 years ago. And yeah, anyway, it's just fun. It's fun to think about that aspect. A lot of hard work went into making some really high quality products.
I think that's a good point to potentially end on. But before we go into the playing us out phase, were there any other tidbits, stories, bits of archival crumb that you might be interested in sharing today that maybe didn't necessarily make it into the book, or if there's a favorite section of the book that you found to write?
Uh, well, let's see. A favorite section um, for me was really, um, and I spent just a small amount of time on this, but it relates to what we were just talking about. That there were some structures made, and they were used for their intended purpose for a long time. But then at some point, um, progress happens, and new plans are made for any particular site, whether it's in a city or a bridge, or I mean a bridge location someplace, and plans change, and the structures need to be either removed or modified. And so I was really surprised at how many examples there are of structures that were relocated and repurposed. Two different kinds. Sometimes structures were relocated; they were moved from one location where they were originally installed, and then repurposed somewhere else and are still functioning. Um, a lot of times you see that with a pedestrian bridge. So they may have taken a railroad bridge and moved it somewhere, and it's now a pedestrian bridge. And that is just that's really cool to see the history preserved that way. Um, there are a number of examples I found like that. And then in some cases, the bridges were not moved. They were just transformed from a railroad bridge or automobile bridge to a pedestrian bridge, but they're still in the same spot. And I think that's just really nice to preserve the history that way, and allows us a story to be told. And then, ultimately, to me, you see this structure that survived all those years and still being used largely the way it was intended. That's nice. It's nice to see. There was not enough room to talk about a lot of those structures, but they're international. There are a few examples in Japan, for example, where that's occurred, and all around the country, still finding examples. So one of the things that's been difficult is as a researcher. So when Pencoyd was merged with all these other companies into American Bridge, it became difficult to identify the specific contributions that might have come from Pencoyd. So when you're doing searches for structures after they became incorporated into American Bridge, it may have just been an American Bridge project. And so you may not know exactly which plant had contributed to that particular project unless you had access to the detailed drawings and documents and so forth, which might be possible in some cases. But before the merger, a lot of their products and capabilities were documented with the name Pencoyd, which is kind of a unique name. So it made it relatively easy to do searches and find information about Pencoyd. So, but afterwards it became more difficult. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because I think a lot of what I've found has been due to the unique Pencoyd name. And I'm guessing that there were a lot of structures that were built with a significant Pencoyd contribution from 1905 onwards, where it's been harder to track down, their specific input. So what's presented in the book may be a significant underestimate or undercount of the structures that are out there. So I'm always finding more. I think as structures are documented and word gets out that people are interested in this kind of information. Hey, who built this bridge? Basic information that gets documented. So since the book was published, even I think I have maybe 5 or 10 examples of additional structures I found that I didn't know about before. So the information evolves, and maybe that's one. The other thing I wanted to mention is that one of the real reasons to put all this together is the hope that maybe people who read it and have some connection in their family past to the plant, if they have memories or documents or recollections to share them with your local history society, and make sure any information gets passed along, because it can be really critical for people doing research, this kind of historical research, to get a little piece of the picture. And sometimes you may not realize that some small piece of information can make a link between multiple other pieces of information, and that to a researcher is just a great thing if it can happen. So I wanted to make sure I have a chance to mention that too. The local history societies, I think, are really eager for information like that.
Absolutely. And I think this is a good assignment for our viewers and listeners. Go out and see if you can find your nearest structure with Pencoyd steel in it. Wherever you are in the world, it might be closer to you than you think it is. And
That's
I'd
for
like
sure.
to thank you for putting together this book that explores the history of this manufacturing facility and kind of makes brings those links to the forefront for anyone who wants to learn more.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thank you very much for the invitation to join you and the opportunity to talk more about Pencoyd, Ben. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here today. And for our audience now, if you'd like more Hagley History Hangouts or more information on the Center for the History of Business, Technology, and Society at the Hagley Museum and Library, join us online. You can visit us at hagley.org. That's Hagley dot or yeah, pardon me, dot org. Thanks. Thanks, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks.